Hello friends. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about my friendship with the singer, songwriter, poet Leonard Cohen. One of the reasons I want to do this is because I have a ton of stories about Leonard Cohen, and he belongs to our age, us, me and you, and the people who love his music. He's like part of our cultural family, and I'm starting to forget some of these stories, so I want to just get them down and put them out there and share them so they can be part of the ecosphere around this particular troubadour, legendary troubadour of the 20th and 21st century. So what I'm going to do is just kind of relay stories about Leonard as they come to me so that I don't forget it all before I forget it all. I'm already forgetting it all. Hold on while I sit down in quiet, drink my tea, and try and remember it all. The first time I met Leonard Cohen, I'm really embarrassed to share this. So I was like just starting out in Zen Buddhism at our Rinzai-ji temple in Los Angeles. What happened was I was brand new. I pulled up into the driveway and I didn't know where to park. It's Los Angeles. You do not want to park in the wrong spot. So I parked in the driveway and I went up to him and I said, and he was standing in Gasho waiting to bow into the line. And I look up and I turn around and I'm like, oh my God, it's Leonard Cohen. And now he's looking at me because I'm looking at him and I'm like, hi. I'm wondering if it's okay for me to park my car there? And he goes, I think it's probably okay. And then I said the stupidest freaking line ever. I was like, everybody knows I'd recognize that voice anywhere. I said something like totally stupid like that. And I don't remember what he said, but that was the first time I ever spoke to Leonard Cohen or met him face to face. Cut to 10 years later. So by now I have moved to the monastery. I've been there for 10 years. And one day my teacher's assistant, whom we called the Inji and I was the Shika, so the Shika and the Inji escorted our teacher, Joshu Sasaki Roshi, down to the LA temple, Rinzai-ji. And we're sitting in this temple, and there's like cop helicopters overhead, and sounds of traffic, and we're just sitting in the zendo, and somebody enters the zendo, and I look out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, that's Leonard Cohen. That's Jikan. So Jikan was his monk's name, which meant noble silence. And he was wearing these completely old, ratty Zen Buddhist monk robes because he was a lay-ordained monk. Jikan was back. That night he had tea with my teacher. My teacher found out Jikan was there and he said, bring him up for tea because they were friends. My teacher did not have many friends. The two of them had a very unique relationship. They were two very powerful men, but they were very powerful in very different ways. And they had a very complementary energy. And they spent a lot of time together over the next 4 years. And I was fortunate enough to be around for this because I was helping to take care of my teacher because he was entering the final stage of his life. So about a year or two later, maybe a year and a half later, my teacher, maybe 2 years later, my teacher got very sick. And I was with the Inji and my sick teacher in the hospital. And there was a worldwide Zen Buddhist community that is our Sangha that wanted to know what was going on and how they could help. And there were a number of people that we could have called, but the Inji said, let's call Jikan. We're calling Jikan. Jikan opens doors. And Jikan showed up, drove instantly. About an hour we were at the down, and I think below Mount Baldy at the hospital there. And Jikan showed up. He always was impeccably dressed, like an Italian fashion designer with those black fedoras and those black suits and the black tie and everything perfectly tailored for him. He looked like, I don't know, like an angel or a hitman. He was like a combination between the two. And he showed up in this hospital in the middle of this hot day, even though it was, I think it was like February, it was hot and the hospital was crowded and loud, and G-Con, the hitman angel, showed up with his assistant, and indeed, G-Con did open doors. We transported him from the hospital, I think it was in Upland or something, to Los Angeles, to a bigger, better hospital there. I forget, Cedars-Sinai, I think it is. And Leonard got him a good room, and Roshi was there, and he pulled through this terribly, terribly difficult, strange, I don't know, guys. It's like sometimes you just enter a different realm when you're on this planet. I imagine, you know what this. Those of you who are out there who have entered the death realm, the dying realm, you know what this is like. Suddenly, someone is dying, and when it's a powerful, powerful person, not to mention a powerful, powerful spiritual teacher, as my teacher was, it's like entering a different dimension of reality. I don't know what that is. I'm not into woo-woo here on Zen Confidential, if you're a new viewer of this channel, but I would venture to say that somehow there's, I don't know, man, it was weird, and Leonard was there for it. So it became clear to me that the Inji, Roshi's attendant, was not going to involve anyone in our community in Roshi's medical situation. She was going to keep that inner circle, an inner circle of 3 people, me and her and Leonard, and of course Roshi, and then Leonard's assistant, so I guess technically 5 people. And so I was talking to Leonard like, I've got a whole, I was like a middle manager of the middle way, you could say, as Shika, or head monk of the Mount Baldy Zen Center. And I had all these people out there that I liked and respected and felt somewhat responsible to in our community. And we were a one-man show, and that one man was Joshu Sasaki Roshi, our teacher, and now he was on his deathbed. And I needed to communicate with people, I thought, I felt. And I remember Leonard said, here's what you tell him. His condition is serious, but not fatal. So I put that in an email and I sent it out to people, and it did the trick. The community was held in the balance and waiting, knowing the situation was serious, but that our teacher wasn't on his deathbed, which turned out to be the case. He pulled through this aspiration pneumonia. We brought him back to our temple in Los Angeles and his little apartment there to heal. And now we entered into a phase where G-Con was, I don't know if I said this already, G-Con, which means noble silence, was the lay monk ordained name that our teacher Roshi gave to Leonard. So, and I always referred to him as G-Con because that's how I thought of him, was as a lay monk. And G-Con, myself, and especially Roshi's Inji became his caretakers and helped him get better. I have these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful memories of Leonard from this time. He would come like maybe once or twice a week for a long period of time, and he would bring the best food. He would bring beef tongue and wonderful chicken matzo ball soup and all kinds of great deli stuff. And he would bring sushi sometimes, some amazing, amazing sushi. So he would treat us, and he would treat Roshi. And this was very important because Roshi was learning to swallow. His throat was shot. They told us he was never going to swallow again, that he was going to die. They drilled a hole in his stomach and put a tube in it. We were supposed to feed him fluids through it, like canned junk, right? And Roshi's Inji said, not on your life. And she would take a wonderful meal, like she would cook a fish and she would make salad and she would puree it all into an incredibly thin paste. And then she would pour that in his G-tube, right? And then we would sit around with Leonard and we would eat this feast. And Roshi would just be there smelling it, right? And he was so sick, he could barely move. I've written about that elsewhere. but we would sit him in this chair and we would eat in front of him. And it was a bit like, are we torturing him or inspiring him? We'd eat this beautiful food that Leonard would bring. And eventually one day Roshi said, "Oh, I eat." And we weren't sure if he was going to be able to swallow. That's the thing with aspiration pneumonia. So when he would swallow now, the food would go directly into his windpipe and he would get bacteria in his lungs. That's why he got pneumonia. And so we were worried that was going to happen again. But it turned out those tiny, like hair-thin, delicate muscles in his throat, this old samurai guy at 102 or 3 years old got his ability to swallow back, and soon he was eating with us regularly during these weekly meals where Leonard would bring a nice feast for us to enjoy together. And then Roshi would say, "Oh, cognac!" And then, the Inji would scurry behind him and grab a nice bottle of cognac, because people are always giving Zen masters very expensive bottles of alcohol. Make of that what you will. And Roshi would share them with us. He didn't drink himself by this point. And we would sit there and I would sip some cognac with Leonard. And oftentimes Leonard would just cross his legs in those beautiful, expensive black slacks that he would wear. And they would just sit in silence together. We would all just sit in silence together. And then maybe every once in a while, Roshi and Leonard would trade a few words, or the Inji and Leonard's assistant would be talking back and forth, and Roshi would say, "Oh, their voices like birds," and Leonard would go, "Yes." And then they would both smile and they would just listen to the Inji and the assistant go back and forth. It was very warm in that room, but snug and comfortable. Leonard had a fan. I guess this is what it's like to be the king, baby. He had a fan somewhere, and she was what would you call it? A perfume guru, right? And a scent guru. And she would order, my memory is, bulbs of frankincense from Afghanistan, I believe. And these bulbs of frankincense would come, and Leonard had this warmer, and he would put a bulb on it, and this scent would fill the room, this nice, warm, comfortable room, and you just have a little bit of sip of this high-end cognac, and it was some of my fondest memories are of this time, because it was such a safe, warm, privileged place, being up in that cabin with that inner circle of beautiful people. Oftentimes, Leonard's assistant and the Inji would go to the Korean spa, and it was my job to sit there with Leonard and take care of Roshi. And Roshi was an old man, and when you are old, baby, you shut down on the inside. Like, stuff starts to fall apart in there. The body begins to get ideas of its own. For a very long time, it was following orders, but now it's like, I'm not going to have a bowel movement anymore because I don't feel like it. So then we would have to find various ways to inspire the old machinery to do its job. And sometimes this would produce, you get the picture. Leonard was not, he was not a dilettante when it came to being Roshi's attendant. I remember one time, I will spare you the excremental details, the two of us taking Roshi into the bathroom and Leonard rolling up his sleeves, and I was holding Roshi. So Roshi's like trembling in my hands because I'm holding him up, and Leonard was back there cleaning him off without any disgust or embarrassment, nothing but like quiet, respectful love and appreciation for this man, his old teacher and his friend. And I really respected that. I was kind of wondering, because I didn't know Leonard that well yet. I was kind of like, okay, pretty boy. I had a little bit of that attitude, because I kind of did think of him more as a monk than a writer at the time. It is a testament to how we all felt about our teacher, for good and ill, that around my teacher, Leonard was just another kind of monk, and that's indeed how Leonard presented himself always, was just another monk. And I'm a pretty bad one at that, he used to say. So I was wondering how he was going to do in this job as Inji. And he did pretty well. He got right in there and did his job, which involved a warm, wet rag. You can fill in the blanks. Another nice memory I have from one of those days where it was just Leonard and I and Roshi was Leonard was working on one of his albums. So he had gone to India, and I believe he was in India those 10 years when I didn't see him. Like when I met him, when I made that stupid comment about everybody knows, I recognize that voice anywhere. And when he showed up in the Zendo in his ratty monk robes 10 years later, I believe he was in India getting fleeced by his former manager. I'm not going to go into that, though we were part of that because we kept receiving, I shouldn't go into this, but we would get, as head monk, I would get screeds that were hundreds of pages long. And I'll just leave it at that. So Leonard was recording new music because suddenly the guy had been, it's my understanding, that he had had his money stolen. So I remember him sitting on Roshi's couch, and he was very small. He was very small. He was kind of short, and he was very skinny when I knew him. And he was sitting with his legs crossed on Roshi's couch, big window with the sun coming through it. Behind him, one story down, was the courtyard with the plum tree and those Los Angeles parrots. Why there are parrots, I don't know, but they're always flocking overhead and making noise. And I remember him sitting there, and he had his iPad, and he was making one of his songs, and I was watching him work, and he had a few things going, and Roshi was sitting in his chair, and Roshi was kind of just chilling, looking out the window, just meditating. He would just sit there and he'd look out the window. Totally awake, Roshi was, but not talking and not formally meditating. But I noticed this Zen master at the end of his life, as I spent a lot of time with him, just meditating without doing it formally. Just sit there looking out the window, and then he would look around the room, and you could just do your thing. That was a nice thing about being around Roshi and Leonard. You could just do your thing. You just sit there, do whatever, it was always like, you're not gonna sit there and eat a bag of chips or something. Come on, but you can just be with these guys. And I remember Leonard's just being was, he had his iPad, and he said he was working on, I think he was reworking maybe a Lorca poem. And he named his daughter after Lorca, and he liked the poet Lorca. And he was maybe reworking a Lorca poem or working another poem that wound up on one of his albums. And he said he'd been working on it he said he's been like 20 years he had been working on it. And he said it takes a while to get something right. You can't push it. And he was listening to all this music at the same time, and mostly it was like these obscure and interesting blues standards and jazz standards. And I was just kind of watching him, and every once in a while he'd read me a line, and he would have tweaked something very minor in it, and then he would go back to it. But there was a real energy there as he worked, a real energy in the room. And it didn't strike me as being how he usually works. I mean, clearly the guy works in silent, alone in a room. So he was kind of sharing his process. It was really cool. Leonard spent many years studying with Ramesh Balsekar. Ramesh Balsekar, I think, was the translator for, was it the I Am That guy? I think Nisargadatta. So this Nisargadatta was like a street vendor who sold cigarettes and was also one of the most revered Vedantist teachers of the 20th century, an Indian guy. And his translator was Ramesh Balsekar. And Leonard, my understanding is that actually a mutual friend, a monk, gave Leonard a book from Ramesh Balsekar, this Vedant, who now then became a teacher in his own right. I don't think he ever officially got transmission to teach from Nisargadatta. I think, is it Nisargadatta? I can't remember. He just started teaching, and Leonard one day packed his bags and went to live in India with this teacher. And he was this teacher, Ramesh Balsekar's Inji. And I might be getting some of these details wrong because it's been a long time. It's been over a decade, but I just want to share this as best I can. Forgive me, G-Con, if you're up there or down there or in between there, if I get this wrong. But it was really interesting. I sat down with Leonard one day. Roshi became sick again. We took Roshi to the hospital. Days and nights, the Inji and I were sleeping in the hospital. Leonard would come and visit us. He would take us down into the hospital cafeteria to eat. One day we went down there, Leonard and we sat down, and I asked him about what Ramesh Balsekar taught. And he said that Sasaki Roshi, our Zen teacher, Leonard was kind of joking, but kind of not. He was telling an observation in a joking way. He said, our teacher Sasaki Roshi doesn't want you to grasp it, doesn't want you to even maybe get it. So right when when it starts to make sense, he makes it, blows the top off your understanding and makes it obscure and mysterious again. He said something like that. But he said Ramesh Balsekar wants you to get it. And he lays it out as clearly and as systematically as possible. And then Leonard spent the next 25 minutes laying it out for me as clearly and systematically as possible. And my memory of it, and I am not adept in the Vedantic school. I've just never been that drawn to it. I've known many people who were and who are in it, and they're not non-duality teachings within Vedanta remind a lot of people of Zen and vice versa, and there's a lot of crossover there that can be talked about. I've just never been that drawn to Vedanta, but I remember Leonard saying, if my memory serves, that the way that Ramesh explained it to him was the human being is like a computer, and God is the software. And everything is like running on God. Everything is running on God. God is like the software. Everything's software, right? And we don't have to do anything. We don't have to try. It's just going to happen on its own. And so then Leonard was telling me that people would be like, Ramesh, but I don't get it. And then Ramesh would be like, well, stick around. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. You not getting it is part of the big picture and exactly how it's supposed to be. The software of God is still running through you. Someday you might get it. And apparently my understanding was one day Leonard got it. And Ramesh said, yeah, you got it. But all those years with Sasaki Roshi were preparation for this moment, which now that I think about it, I don't quite understand because it struck me that Ramesh Balsekar was very much not a free will guy, not the kind of guy where effort and determination have an effect on one's spiritual life. In fact, God works through you a certain way, and that's 100% your situation and reality. But anyways, that's what Ramesh said to Leonard was that, yeah, you worked all those years with Sasaki Roshi, and now you get it. What Leonard got, I mean, that's up for you to think about. I did get the sense when I was around him that he had a spirit and a vibe that wasn't like a Zen monk type vibe. It was a bit, he always had that sort of that twinkle in his eye that I associate with many of the Vedantic practitioners, many of the people I knew in Los Angeles who went and studied in India for many years with gurus there. It kind of like, it seemed to me, Leonard, you kind of sit back and let things unfold and just kind of nod. And he told me that Leonard said that he woke up one morning in India and that his depression was gone. And he said it's never, ever come back. Over those 4 years, I saw Leonard pretty regularly, once or twice a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. We became kind of friends, and we talked a lot about writing, but it was more in the things that he said offhandedly about art and writing that have stuck with me. And at the time, I never knew these things would stick with me. Leonard was like a B, C, D, E, F, G minor secondary character in my life at that time. I deeply respected him and very much loved him, as everyone did. He had this low, smoldering charisma. Then he was also very gentle and kind and funny. There was not a thing that was heavy or obtrusive about his presence. He was the picture of grace and gentility and a kind of unobtrusive generosity in spirit and in action. And how did it come to be that he wrote the foreword for my book, Zen Confidential? Well, way early on, rewind here, the Inji knew that he was coming to do a retreat at the Mount Baldy Zen Center. This is before I really knew Leonard at all. And so she took all the magazines where I had been publishing Buddhist essays. She and I were close. And she put them in Leonard's room and marked the spots where my essays were. And so Leonard was in the Inji cabin. She put the Tricycle and the Shambhala Sun and other magazines where I had published. She put those in Leonard's room, and then Leonard, one day out of nowhere, he comes up to me and he says, "I read your stuff. It's fucking great, man." We got to talking a little bit later on, and he said, "You really nailed this scene. You just nailed this scene. I've been waiting for somebody to do that." And he said, and he looked at me, and he said, "If there's ever anything I can do, let me know." Well, of course I had a plan. I thought maybe someday down the road, when I gather these essays together for chapters in a book, that you could write the foreword. So when that eventually happened, I asked him to write the foreword, and of course he agreed, and he wrote me a nice little foreword for the book, Zen Confidential, Confessions of a Wayward Monk. He was also always giving me material. I could tell when he was doing it. He would pause, and then he would begin to tell me a long story about our past as a community and about some of the crazy stuff that happened. And he kept telling me, somebody's got to get this down, a big novel that captures all this craziness. He would tell me some wild stories. I talk a little bit about some of what he told me in this essay that I'm going to be publishing in Tricycle later this year called Happens to the Heart. So you can Google that. I also talk about some of the stories that Leonard told me in the essay that I wrote for the New York Times, and I can't remember what I called that one. It was after Leonard died. But I don't want to repeat myself here, so you can look up those stories if you want. But I remember Leonard was always trying to help me along in very subtle ways. And I remember when the time came for my book to be published, I remember we were sitting in my teacher's room. My teacher had no idea that that I was publishing this book, and nobody in my community did. And we're talking openly in front of him, but he doesn't really. I don't know what he knew actually. I don't think he ever knew that I published a book, and he didn't follow English always very well. So he's sitting right here, and I'm sitting across from Leonard. This is when we were all still at the monastery before my teacher got sick and we went to Los Angeles. And I remember Leonard looked at me, and I was coming up on publication day of my first book. And of course I was excited and proud, and I was also holding the book maybe a bit differently than a first-time writer normally would, because I was a monk, and I considered that to be my priority, that life, even though that was like my spouse, and writing was like my affair that I was secretly in love with, you know. And I remember Leonard looking at me and delivering a sentence, and he said, "I know some people at the New Yorker. If you need some help, any help, let me know." And I said, I think I'm just going to throw this book out there into the world and see what happens. And, Leonard was the kind of guy that could speak with silence. My teacher named him Noble Silence, G-Con, and he could speak in silences. Maybe I'm just projecting because he's a legendary rock star, singer, songwriter, an icon, right? Maybe I'm projecting. Whatever the case, my experience was looking at him and getting a pretty clear communication from him. Because I went away from that experience thinking, Leonard knows something I don't know. But I guess I'm just going to kind of see what happens. Cut to maybe a year later, and maybe 6, 7, 8 months after my book came out, Zen Confidential. Once again, we're in the same situation. I'm sitting across from him. My teacher is sitting here. We're having tea. My teacher's just kind of zoning out or something. The Ingy is doing the dishes somewhere or something. Leonard and I are talking, and Leonard says, "How's your book doing?" And I said, "It's okay. It's doing okay." I mean, I was honored, proud, and happy to have a book that was selling at all. It was not in the New York Times bestseller, however. And I remember Leonard looking at me again and pause, a beat. And he's communicating things in the silence. And they said, "It's hard to move the needle." It's hard to move the needle. And then I connected it to that conversation I had had many months before when he said, "Is there anything I can do to help? Can I put the power of my celebrity to some good use? I can talk to David Remnick at the New Yorker, whom I know." He didn't say this, but then I realized it. And then I realized Leonard knows how this works. Like some guy, some writer, he's seen it all his whole life. I remember telling him, "Leonard, you've been successful your whole life." He wrote a book of poetry when he was, in his teens. And I believe that won a poetry book award, gave him some money. He bought a little house in a Greek island. There he met Steve Sanfield, another Jewish poet. I met the only other Jewish poet on this island, Steve Sanfield, who became one of Leonard's best friends. Steve Sanfield was a student of Joshu Sasaki Roshi. Joshu Sasaki Roshi then met Leonard through Steve Sanfield, and this whole relationship started. But I mean, through it all, Leonard wrote 2 novels that were very successful. Then in his early 30s, I think he was 31, he became a songwriter, and then he became Leonard Cohen as we know him, right? He was successful his whole life. He's seen writers, poets, singers, songwriters, artists come and go of varying degrees of talent. And I remember seeing those 2 experiences with him. And I remember thinking, Leonard knew something I didn't. It's maybe not enough to just do what I wanted to do, just throw your work out there and see what happens. Sometimes you need the help of somebody who has some status. And he was offering me that help, but I decided to try and do it on my own. And I don't know if it would have ever changed anything in terms of my book sales or something, but I do remember that. I'll never forget the way he said that and what it meant. It's hard to move the needle. I think he's seen so many artists who were good, who had potential, who could have been great. I'm not talking about myself, but other people, because I know he's a mentor to others too, and he's just seen them kind of disappear, or he's seen works land that he thought were great that didn't really move the needle. I thought that was very interesting. I remember one time too, he was telling me a story about what happens when you do move the needle. He said he was talking to the film director, Oliver Stone, probably around the time of Natural Born Killers, because I think there was some Leonard music in that Oliver Stone version of the Quentin Tarantino script, Natural Born Killers. And Oliver Stone was telling Leonard a story that Leonard told me. And Leonard, so Oliver Stone was telling Leonard, I spent my whole life like pushing my art, pushing my movies, pushing my script, like Sisyphus, pushing a boulder up the hill, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it. He said, I worked so hard. I worked day and night doing press junkets and talking to the money people and convincing my agent to go out with my new script and going on every talk show and trying to sell my movies that no one wanted to see. And then he said, I did Platoon. And he said he put it out there. And then at some point, it took on a life of its own, he said. And Leonard was describing how this had also happened in Leonard's life at some point. I don't remember, maybe it was with Suzanne or something, the song Suzanne, which made him famous. And Oliver Stone was saying that he got like a press clipping of his movie Platoon showing in Vietnam or something, and all it was the Vietnam advertisement in a newspaper for his movie Platoon, and that was when Oliver Stone knew that his movie was out there working for him. Finally, his art was like alive in the world, it was just spreading completely on its own, and Oliver Stone told Leonard that was like the day his life changed, when he realized that now he like kind of like made it. I remember Leonard telling me something similar to his own experience, like when he went to a restaurant one night and he just bought a quality wine and a quality meal for one of the first times in his life, and he learned that money can purchase quality. Not that money is a good in and of itself, or that it's nice to be a high status, high roller who orders expensive wine, but that the difference between a quality wine and a quality meal with natural, healthy, good ingredients is very clear, to him. And I thought that was interesting. And he always struck me as being a guy who really respected and admired quality, not stuff, not money. I remember I went to his apartment at one night after. This is kind of a funny story. I went to his home. I went to his home one night. It was very simple, very small, simple home with 2 levels. One of them I think his daughter lived on, and then he lived at the top level. It was just like in the Wilshire district in Los Angeles. And it was after my teacher was sick, and Leonard and I were like at the hospital all day. We went back to his house, and he gets on his computer. I'm futzing around with something, like drinking tea or something. He gets on his computer. Okay, I gotta try to remember this. It was when one of his, I think it was Old Ideas. The new album came out called Old Ideas, and he gets on to Amazon and he goes, I'm checking how I'm doing. And he gets on there and he goes, and he starts making this voice, like what was it? He was like, I'm a wucky wabbit. In that Leonard Cohen voice, I'm a wucky wabbit. He said, I'm beating Adele and Paul McCartney. So his album was #1 on Amazon Tunes, and I was right there when he saw it. And he was like making this bad imitation of Bugs Bunny, and he was like, I'm beating Adele and Paul McCartney. Would you look at that? It was pretty cool. It's funny because I was like sitting here thinking about things that would be nice to tell in terms of writing tips and stuff, but to be honest, just to be around someone of his stature who respected my writing and wasn't BSing me, that was a kind of power that he gave me. It was a kind of a superpower. I mean, it changed things when someone like that tells you he respects your work, tells you why, and means it. And I know he meant it because he also told me when he didn't like or respect my work. The final essay in Zen Confidential is a longer essay where I write about how I had this brief, flirtation with Vicodin, actually. And it was, I don't know if I would call it an addiction, but there were a few months when I just kept popping them because they made me feel good. And I wrote about that and a long, crazy bus trip I took with my teacher. We had this big, huge RV, and we drove to Las Vegas, and I was popping these things, and I was driving this big bus, and they're in Vegas. It's a long story. In any event, Leonard read it, and he was icy. This came at the end of the book, and it was after he'd read all the other essays, and then it took me a while to write this one, and then I gave it to him, and he said, I didn't like it. I knew guys who had substance abuse problems. You didn't capture it. I didn't like it. Didn't have the stuff. Or something like that. Wasn't right. Didn't like it. And I was like, all right, respect. Fuck you very much, Leonard. But if he didn't like something artistically, he didn't hold back. I'm back, man. I just had to take a little bit of a nap. This is one of those days when there's wind blasting through the streets, and then it dries you out, and it fills you with ghosts and spirits, and your head's a little bit... So I had to take a nap, and I started remembering all these Leonard stories. I feel like he visited me in my dream and said, don't forget. I remember he came into Roshi's cabin once, and he said that he had been offered $4 million to put Hallelujah in a Ford commercial. It was like a Ford Tundra. I think it was maybe it was $6 million. My memory is $4 million, that he'd been offered $4 million to let them put Hallelujah in a Ford Tundra commercial. And I was just like, dude, no way on hell and earth. And I was giving him my pitch, and he was like, yeah, but $4 million's a lot of money. And then I remember seeing him struggling with it. Not struggling with it, he was just talking about it. And then I realized, what if I was offered $4 million? I wonder how closely I would hew to my principles. I also remember when he was going on tour again, and he was getting the band together, and they were, he was becoming a thing again in his final years, and he didn't know if it was going to happen. He got a band together, needed the tour, needed the money, got ripped off, had no gifts for his family in terms of what he would leave them when he died, I guess. And so he wanted to make some money back, and so he was going to tour, and he didn't know how it was going to go, and didn't know if anyone would want to see him. And then it started happening. He started getting big again, and there's this famous studio on Hollywood Boulevard, and he and his whole band was practicing there, and he said, why don't you guys come? And so we loaded Roshi into his wheelchair, and took him into the car that Leonard had donated to Roshi and drove him to Hollywood Boulevard. And this was at the end of his life when Roshi wasn't leaving his apartment at all. And we took him to this studio where Kiss and Guns N' Roses had recorded. And Leonard and his band were there in this big soundproofed room. Actually, it wasn't big. It was kind of intimate and cozy. And his whole band was there. And we wheeled Roshi up to nobody else was in the room except the band, Leonard, and us. Me and the Inji and Roshi. And we put Roshi in the front row, and we sat on either side of him, and we watched the whole concert. It was like a private concert with Leonard, and it was really cool. And they were performing for us. And I remember Leonard did his song, The Future, and he took out that song, and it, give me something and anal sex, and he changed it to casual sex or something. I was like, dude, why did you change that great line? And so then they were doing some more songs, and he sang that one again, and he put that line back in. And then when the private concert, they were just practicing for their tour. And then when the private concert was over, Leonard brought all of the band down, and Roshi, in his final years, Roshi would just give these impromptu Dharma talks, and Roshi gave one of those, and Leonard was like really respectful, and he wanted all of his like band to listen. But if you didn't know Roshi spiritually by that point, what he was saying might not make a lot of sense. It was kind of esoteric towards the end of his life. And so I think the band was just kind of humoring Leonard. That was the sense I got, but it was very powerful and very respectful. Leonard, I think Roshi even went on tour with Leonard way back in the day. I remember something about that. And I remember Leonard telling me that he was really depressed that one of his albums got panned. And then Roshi told him, become darker in your music. Become more sad better. And then that gave Leonard some confidence to keep making the kind of music that he wanted to make. And I could see his respect for Roshi when we were all sitting around with his band, and Leonard was holding the silence while Roshi talked Dharma, basically. And then afterwards, we all went with the band in the back room, and there's like a party with all these cool LA people. We're just sitting there. I'm sitting there in my robes. We're sitting there with Roshi, like nerdy Zen people, you know, while all these cool LA people are walking around and, you know, vibing with Leonard, you know, who's just like, you know, being gracious. Yeah, guys. And then I remember there's lots of other stuff in there that I won't go into because this isn't the place for it. But then I remember one of the last times, the second to the last time that I saw Leonard, it was interesting because I was, what's the name of that street in Los Angeles? I was there completely independent of Leonard Cohen. And I was visiting a friend that I had not seen in many, many years. And I'd known him from my Hollywood days, and I was still a monk. We were having pizza. I cannot remember the name of the street in Los Angeles, but it's a very beautiful place. There's a bookstore, and not the Bourgeois Pig, Bricks and Scones is there, so you can look it up on the internet. Larchmont, that's what it was. It was in Larchmont. And I had my day off as being a monk, and I was getting a meal with my friend. He brought my book, Zen Confidential. Oh, will you sign it? He was being generous, and I signed it. He said, I can't believe that you know Leonard Cohen. He said, I can't believe it. That's so cool. So I was telling him Leonard stories. Talk about synchronicity. I am not kidding you. We walk out of the pizza place. I'm walking down the street, and Leonard is right there. He's like, hey, Gento, come on up. So he met my friend, you know, then my friend left, and I went upstairs, and it turned out his Stranger Music was right, his offices for Stranger Music, which was Leonard's company, I think, was right here in Larchmont. And he was there with a really wonderful guy, a French guy, who has gone on to write a long, like 600-page biography of Leonard that just got published, a really beautiful biography of Leonard Cohen that just got published. And this guy was there talking to Leonard, and Leonard was also working through one of his final books. He was editing it. And we just sat there, and we had the most wonderful afternoon, the three of us, me and Leonard and this guy. And we talked all about, Leonard was like, oh, Roshi's sick now, you know, everything's coming to an end. He's like, I love these male institutions where it's just a bunch of guys, hard-headed guys that get together and get stuff done. He's like, you should turn Mount Baldy into like a place for these guys. You should have a shooting range, he told me. I couldn't tell if he was serious or not. He's like, you need to have just a place where a bunch of tough guys to come and knock skulls, you know. And we sat around and we talked about poetry and writing, and then, you know, the sun was setting, it got a little bit late, and so I said goodbye, and I left, and then I didn't see Leonard for a little bit, and he did an album, Popular Problems, which he actually, this was before this or after, I don't remember, which he actually devoted to me and the Inji. My monk's name was Gento, and he devoted it to me and her. And then I saw him one last time. He'd finished another album. I think it was his last album. And we went to his house, the Inji and I. And at this point he was sick, but he wasn't talking about it so much, so he didn't bring it up. But he just played that album for us. It was like a listening party, and he played the whole album. It was brand new. It wasn't out yet. It was his last album, and he played the whole thing. And he played some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music from that album. I remember Treaty. I wish there was a treaty I could sign. I wish there was a treaty. I think that's how it goes. I could sign. I wish there was a treaty. Na 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 na. It's such a beautiful song. I wish there was a treaty we could sign. And I remember how it was so powerful because I was fighting with the Inji, whom I had been very close to, and it was the beginning of my end as a monk. And Leonard was there for it, and he knew what was going on. And then Leonard died. And he died when I was at a conference for Zen Buddhism and science or something. And I found out that he died, and at the conference, and I was sad and moved, and I just wrote something down on Facebook, and I threw a picture of the two of us up there. And somehow I had a friend or a follower on Facebook who was an editor at the New York Times. And this guy sent me a private message and said, do you want to write something for us at the New York Times about your relationship with Leonard? I was like, well, I'd be honored. I hope I can, not embarrass either of us. And so I wrote a piece. Hold on, I gotta see if this is recording. Indeed it is, but I'm running out of battery. I wrote a piece, and they published it in the New York Times. And I talked about my relationship with Leonard and Leonard's relationship with Roshi. Now, our community was going through some difficulties at that time, my Zen community, and I mentioned these difficulties. And I just mentioned it briefly in one sentence, but Leonard had a way of, attracting energy to himself. And when you mentioned him, you were attracting attention to yourself. And so one of our Zen priests in our community was furious that I had mentioned our teachers, a scandal we were having in our community. And he was furious that I had mentioned it in the New York Times in the context of my relationship with Leonard. And I think he was just jealous of my relationship with Leonard. But anyways, he bombarded our board of directors with emails about how I should be thrown out for mentioning Leonard and my teacher and our scandal in our community, all this stuff. And then this kind of snowballed. And it wound up with climaxing with me resigning from my role within our community as the administrative abbot of our temple and leaving my life as a monk. And that was Leonard's influence in my life. That essay that I wrote led to me leaving as a monk. It was powerful, powerful. The man had a powerful impact on my life. I'm very grateful for the time I was able to spend with him. I shared it with you here because I know so many people are such big fans, and they always love it whenever I mention Leonard. So why should I sit on all these stories? I hope I got most of them out. I didn't really get most of them out, but really more than anything, what I remember from my time with him is not some specific thing, like the time I made fun of the Rolling Stones for being so old and getting up there on stage and dancing around and singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," and then Leonard kind of looking at me, and then I realized that he was friends with them and I was making fun of his friends. How many people in this world can you can you be with and make fun of Mick Jagger, and then like have the person you're with look at you kind of like, hey man, that's my buddy. but he was of course gracious, and he said I can't believe they're getting up there dancing around on stage like that every night. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough. One final thing I want to get across. One of my fond memories of Leonard is his big concert. I don't remember where it was. It wasn't the Staples Center in Los Angeles, because that's the big one. It was I don't remember where it was. It was some big concert hall in Los Angeles. And of course we went to see Leonard perform. And Leonard, we brought Roshi in. We brought our teacher to come to this concert because Roshi always wanted to go. I'm going to lose battery here. Roshi always wanted to go. Hold on. I don't know how much juice I got. I'm running against time here. Roshi always wanted to go to these. Always wanted to see Leonard. Always loved being with Leonard. Leonard gave him energy. Leonard, they were two kings in their own worlds. And kings like to hang with kings because they don't get the sense that somebody wants something from them. So Roshi went to this concert, and it was a long, beautiful concert. And the energy that Leonard had reminded me of something. It reminded me of Roshi. Like my teacher Roshi, he was in his hundreds, and he would just keep going and going and going if he was giving a Dharma talk or working with a student or working with us in retreat. And this was after he was done teaching, but still, like if he was giving a Dharma talk, just impromptu to students, he would go and he would go and he would go. And you could see his body slumping and slumping, and he would keep going and going. And eventually, he would literally just pass out. And we would let him rest, and then he would wake up again, and he would start giving us more Dharma. So that was the teaching that he gave as a teacher, was you go until you have nothing left. You go 100%, he would say, 100%, everything. And that takes you to new places. That's how your ego can die, is through that kind of great effort. And I remember Leonard telling me after this concert, I couldn't have done it without Roshi's teachings. I mean, Leonard told me like they would go from city to city, sometimes overnight, and like 5 nights a week in 3 different cities, they would be doing these concerts. And Leonard gave everything at these concerts. They were like 3.5-hour concerts, and he kept going and going. And he said, the secret to success is always give them more than they paid for. And he did that at these concerts. And I could see the spirit of Roshi imbued in the way he was manifesting on stage, the way he stepped aside and introduced all of his band as like not only equals, but as superiors in their craft, because he had some amazing musicians. And he would make fun of his own musical ability and his own voice. And the way that he addressed the audience, and the way that, and connected with the audience, and the way that he kept giving of himself on stage, it reminded me of how Roshi would give and give. Because Leonard was an old man at that point. He was late 70s, maybe even it was like early 80s. And it was like a 3.5, 4-hour concert. He gave everything he had. And that was a beautiful, beautiful lesson to me. I remember seeing a picture of Leonard from when he went with Roshi. Leonard was like in his 40s or 50s, and he went with Roshi to, I gotta see if I'm still recording. Okay, baby. Still going, still going, still going. Okay, I'm like in the red and battery. I saw this picture of Leonard when I was at Mount Baldy. It was like in an old photo album. It was Leonard in Japan from like a few decades earlier, when Leonard was in his like cynical middle-aged man, everybody knows the future phase. And Leonard was just kind of sitting there with these sunglasses on, and they were kind of like yellow lenses, kind of tinted, and he had his arm around some good-looking Japanese woman, and he looked like a creeper. And I remember thinking, he looked tortured. He looked like an unhappy middle-aged man. Hey, I'm just projecting. So, take that for what it's worth. But I remember thinking, I'm glad I got to know this old, like, sagacious Leonard, this perspicacious, wise old Yoda Leonard, this happy man, because he showed me that you can be an artist and you can be happy. Not even happy, like he was writing love songs to God at the end of his life. These rabbinical, came from a rabbinical lineage. I believe it was a Russian rabbinical lineage, the Cohens. And he was writing love songs to God, to the ineffable, at the end of his life. He did his best work, in my opinion. I don't like that early troubadour stuff. I remember you well in the Chelsea Hotel. It's like, yeah. I like his stuff best at the end of his life. Happens to the Heart, or the Old Ideas album, or the Popular Problems album, or You Want It Darker album. This is like a guy who has lived a long life, who has been a wandering troubadour, a novelist, a poet, a famous rock star, a cynical, middle-aged guy who's washed up. I mean, I remember he told me, and then I heard about this later too, it's a famous story. One of the executives, I think at Sony, said of his album, which had Hallelujah on it, said to him, "Leonard, we know you're great, we just don't know if you're any good." The point being, we don't know if you're bad enough to be able to get any airtime on the radio. Yeah, we know you're great, you're Leonard Cohen. We don't know if you're any good. Meaning, he went through all of that, and then he came out the other side, a man singing his truth before he died, before the cancer took him, before the world changed, and there's a different political situation, and everything, before everything, he got out his final poems and his final songs, and they're so deep, that stuff he came out with at the end of his life, and it's a reminder that you can do your best work right up until the very end. His best album is I think it's called The Last Dance, The Final Dance, I forget what it's called, that has Happens to the Heart on it. It's got this beautiful hummingbird. Listen to the hummingbird whose wings you cannot see. Listen to the hummingbird, don't listen to me. Listen to the something fly whose day's but number 3. Listen to the fly, don't listen to me. Listen to the mind of God, whose thoughts you cannot see. Listen to the mind of God. Don't listen to me. Yeah, don't listen to me either. If you like this channel, you can go to patreon.com/showsonjackhaubner to support it. Thanks for listening to these stories about Leonard Cohen. He was a beautiful man. A beautiful man. If you like his music, I can tell you that from what I knew about him as a person, you would have loved him as a person. So it's inspirational to know that there's some famous, beautiful, talented people out there who are actually wonderful human beings too. Friends, thanks for listening. Ciao.